Welcome to Debunked, a show where we analyze healthcare news, but perhaps more importantly, call out industry practices that seem entirely insane. So who's we? I am Arundhati Parmar, Editor-in-Chief of MedCity News, a healthcare publication that has been around since 2009.
And I'm Samir Batra. I'm the Managing Partner of HIP. We're a healthcare venture firm.
So Samir, we've chosen a rather bold name and tagline for this show. So why should people care? What are we going to give them that they're not getting elsewhere?
Well, everybody else has a lot of fluff. So I don't know about you, but when I have been watching these shows or listening to these shows or whatever you want to call it, we just sit there and just keep, like, it's good to celebrate, successes and milestones and raises and all that stuff. But there's no hard questions. There's no yin to the yang. It's just all about, oh, yay, good job, great job, you raised debt. Like, if you really think about it, when you raise capital, great job, you just added more debt to your table. What are you going to do with it? What's sort of the good and the bad about it? So I think, I want to get away from the fluff. I'm tired of the fluff. Maybe there's others that are tired of the fluff, so let's bring them non-fluff. How about that?
Okay, we will certainly try to do that. We will celebrate too, but we will also add a much needed dose of skepticism. So I guess the next question, who the heck are we to even attempt this?
Well, I guess I'll start. I guess I would say tried and failed entrepreneur. But no, I guess, to your point, successes and failures. I think you learn more from your failures than you do your successes. So been in the industry for 20 plus years, started off really delivering best practices and evidence-based research to providers. So actually going and doing workflow implementation at provider organizations, working with clinicians in the front lines. And then, if that wasn't difficult enough, I decided, well, why not go become an entrepreneur in healthcare? So I spent 14 years across 4 different startups in the digital health IT space. As I mentioned, had some successes, had some failures, but had some interesting milestones too. So had some exits along the way. And then one fine day, I had a venture firm reach out to me and they said, hey, we actually don't know what we're doing in healthcare. Shocking, right? And they said, we need help actually guiding and advising our investment. So that's how I started getting into the industry, sort of started advising these startups, from a board perspective, from an investor perspective. And then I looked around and I was like, how hard could this be to go and invest? Again, let's just go do another challenge. But I've always had sort of a little bit of a different approach to things. So I started HIP with no background in venture, no background in investing. And my thesis really was to invest based on a collaborative process, right? Being diligent, being really front and center. And so it's been a labor of love. Didn't really think what it was going to become. I didn't think I was building a venture firm. I was just really trying to bring people together to say, let's invest smartly, right? Let's invest in a collaborative manner. Let's cover every basis of healthcare when you look at an opportunity. And, 3.5, 4 years in the making and still building, that's what we're sort of doing. So I feel like I have a little bit to add now. I feel like I can add now. 3, 4 years ago, if you asked me to comment on investing in innovation, I would have been like, no comment. But today, I feel like I can, sort of share my perspective.
So similar for me, I've been covering healthcare innovation news since 2011, so more than a decade. And you pick up breadcrumbs along the way. You have access to smart people and events. That cumulative knowledge, along with a job that requires me to hold people accountable, is why I'm here today. Now, some of you might think, as people do about journalists, that they don't have opinions and they should just report. I will disagree humbly with you on that. I think everyone has an opinion on everything. And these days, with social media in its heyday, I think, no one is reticent to share their opinions, however dumb or smart. So I'm taking a page out of that. I think our North Star will always be, to borrow that famous tagline from Fox News, fair and balanced. So Samir and I will try to achieve that, or at least have that as our guiding light, despite our individual opinions. So enough about the rationale for the show. I said that we were going to call out bad industry practices, and have I a story to share?
Okay.
Okay, so this goes back to September. End of September, I go to play pickleball with my son. Actually, my husband also joins me. And I may be a terrible athlete, but I'm pretty competitive. So in my 5'1" frame, I'm trying to return a shot from my 6-foot-year-old son, and I lunge forward, twist my ankle, and fall to the ground. I'm thinking this is a bad sprain. The hilarious part of this is, so as I hobble off the court, my husband continues to play. 20 minutes later, when I'm back courtside just to watch them play, he falls as well. I found out later that I've broken my foot. He has torn his Achilles heel. Anyway, we both end up at a local provider, pretty well respected, not Los Gatos, in Los Gatos, but Golden State Ortho and Spine. And their surgeon, Nicholas Abidi. Excellent surgeon, did a great surgery on my husband, talks a mile a minute, so you better keep up, otherwise you're going to be left behind. And with me, he basically said, well, you've broken your foot, but this is sort of the best kind of foot break. All you need, foot fracture, all you need is a boot. Great. 6 weeks later, I am seeing by the physician assistant there, Ray, and Ray tells me that I need to be fitted for a custom Arizona brace.
Yeah.
Okay, I call up a couple of providers that he offered and got the closest and the fastest one, who was gave me an appointment basically 2 days later. I show up. I explained to Brian, who is with Beyond Prosthetics, the name of the vendor, that look, Brian, today is November 9th. December 16th, I'm leaving for India on a large sightseeing trip. So this will be ready by then, right? And he's like, yeah, it should be, takes around 4 weeks. It takes a while, 4 weeks, but it should get there. Very nice. I get fitted, leave, go about my business, physical therapy, etc., etc. Now it's December, and I have not heard from Brian or Beyond Prosthetics. So I call Brian and I say, hey, Brian, I'm leaving next week for India, as you well know. Where is the brace? And then he calls me back, leaves me a voicemail saying that it's going to get here on Wednesday. It's been mailed already. It's getting here on Wednesday. I'm leaving Saturday, all good. Well, actually, it never arrived. So I went with my foot and all. Luckily, didn't have any problems. Taj Mahal, all the great sightseeing in India, no problems. Come back in early January and realize that he has left a voicemail on December 19th and 20th, long after I've left, saying, come pick up the brace. I'm like, all right, that's not possible. I go up to JP Morgan, do my reporting, come back. Then I get this letter that they have sent, basically saying, come pick up the brace. But I wanted to read a portion of this out loud to you and the audience. This is a custom brace that has been prepaid by Beyond Prosthetics to fabricate, and the brace cannot be returned to the factory since it is custom made to you. We will need to dispense this to you and bill your insurance, or unfortunately, the bill in full will be sent to you. Is there no shame? I mean, come on, does people's word not matter? Anyway, so forget their specific actions. Since we are talking constructively about healthcare, and this seems like a complete failure in care coordination, who do you think is to blame here? I mean, should the physician assistant and Golden State Ortho know that this is the time frame for anything to be created custom? Should Beyond Prosthetics be telling their referring provider that, look, this is how much time it takes? It just seems completely outrageous to me that they did not feel any qualm in sending that letter to me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's good that you're okay, right? Because it would have been worse if you needed it, and you still didn't have it. Yeah. But really, you mentioned it, coordination of care. And there's really a breakdown by all parties here, right? So, for example, your physician that you went to, they're recommending to you a list of providers. They should probably know or have an idea of the relationship that they have with them, the lead time to get products, things like that. Who's coordinating that communication? Right now, it's a triangle. It's you, it's the provider, and it's the person where you're getting the product from. So there's obviously a miscommunication or a lack of communication between those two entities. And then, of course, when you're telling them that detail, who on their side is capturing that? Right? I mean, last time I checked, if somebody tells me that I'm going to put a note in their account that this person needs this by this date, they're leaving the country.
Right.
So it's a complete breakdown, right? And then a fact that this is going to get worse before it gets better because insurance is going to defend your position. You never picked up the product, so why should insurance pay for it?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So insurance is going to say, well, it's not us. And then they're going to try to sit there and say, well, you need to pay the whole bill. And then you're going to have to go back and, and obviously you shouldn't pay.
Yeah, I've already...
product. Well,
exactly.
I mean, you know how like when you pay for something, it always asks you, has the service been rendered?
Right.
Has the product been delivered? Well, it wasn't. And it was a failure to comply based on requirements and timelines that they put forth. But I think your provider should have also known this stuff. Like they should also be in the loop. Like, did they know that this is happening? And it's not your responsibility because you've been handed off.
Right.
See, that's the problem with the provider side. They just hand off. Oh, I've referred you. I've done my job. Checklist done. So it's a complete failure on all parts. And this is in all grand scheme of things, it's a small example. But imagine this and multiply it 10x for chronic patients, for elderly, for people who don't know how to communicate or navigate the system that you did. So, I mean, it's the crux of the system that we live in today.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we just sort of like shake it off and shrug our shoulders and just move on.
Yeah.
And that's so sad.
Right. Well, I'm not shrugging. I called and told them I'm not paying for this. Anyway, so that was my healthcare personal news. Let's talk about news, big news that came out in January. And I'm talking about, remember the FDA saying that Florida can actually import drugs from Canada.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating. The fact that, Florida pushed for this to happen. I don't know how realistic it is, given that Canada is a much smaller country, and if it has to supply to a country with a much larger population, I don't know how real and how practical it is. But I think someone is putting a foot down and saying we're not going to take the high drug prices when other countries are paying less. So wanted to hear your take on that news.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, kudos on Florida for taking that step. I mean, FDA created a program, created an application process, and Florida stepped up and said, well, we got a lot of old people here. We have a lot of people taking drugs.
Right.
But then the Canada thing is really interesting too, because look, from a perspective of how Canada functions, right, being a single payer sort of mainly entity, they're producing drugs to support their population. Now, I think you also heard some news coming from them saying, yeah, this is cool, but like for us to support Florida is almost like, that's like supporting another Canada, right, in terms of population. So they don't probably have the means to pull it off. But I think this is an example of states sitting there going, well, countries outside the US have drug pricing is much lower. So let's call this thing out, right? We're talking about myths. How crazy is this, right? So basically, our industry is full with hypocrisy that we just sort of take for granted. And we just sit there and go, oh, this is just the way life is.
Right.
So let's break this down. We manufacture, we are the creators, the innovators of drugs, right? It's completely understood, right? Most drugs are developed, manufactured, FDA is the gold standard, right? But then how do you explain that we are paying 2.4 times higher drug costs than 9 developed countries? And this is a report by RAND Group in 2021. These countries include Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, UK, okay? And if you just subtract that out and just look at countries around us, so Canada and Mexico, our drug prices are 118% more than Canada and over 70% than Mexico. So, and one of the big things here is, another thing to complicate things is, we develop all the drugs, we decide what's going to get passed, what's regulatory passed, what's clinically evident. And then here's the funny thing. Do you know our country is one of the largest manufacturers of these drugs?
What do you mean our country?
India.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Well,
So our birth country. Let's just
I was going to say.
So 57% of actual drugs are manufactured overseas in India, China, and Mexico.
Okay.
So it gets even more complicated. So now you are making the drug, but then it's actually being manufactured overseas. And then those countries are still paying less for the drugs.
Right.
So I don't understand that. And so people sit there and go, well, it's based on population. Last time I checked, we have more population than Canada.
Right.
Last time I checked, we have the more population than probably a lot of countries you put together in Europe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it gets worse. Now, again, some good news, right? Insulin prices will be capped at $35. But again, even then, it's 4 times more expensive than for a 30-day supply of insulin than India. Okay, so you're talking about a patient population that has a lot less GDP per capita, and still they're paying 4 times less, but we are making the drug. So it's still, all of it still doesn't make any sense. And then it gets even more complicated, right? So for example, I just looked, and I was looking at a drug called Anoro. Anoro is a inhaler for COPD. Okay. So in 2021, a 30 inhalation pack for this drug cost US folks $248. Okay. In Canada, it's 64, and in Australia, it's 76.
Wow.
Right. So it's not just insulin or one drug. This problem is, existent throughout. So really the question, almost like I'm going to ask you the question for me to answer, why is this and who is to blame, or how did we get to this point?
Yeah.
Right? And so...
I mean, to be honest with you, I truly believe in American exceptionalism, and I think we proved with mRNA vaccines, that, we have incredible talent. But I think when it comes to drug pricing, we have been exceptionally stupid. And this idea that somehow we must pay for innovation for the entire world. I mean, I met a VC, European VC, who basically said, she didn't even bat an eyelid when she said that, yes, someone must pay for innovation, and that someone has to be the US taxpayer. Now, we are a rich country. We do have some obligations when it comes to, being charitable. Completely get that. But I think when it comes to drug pricing, it's just the double standards are really galling. And I think that's why you see the IRA passed. Now it's being challenged by the pharma manufacturers. We'll see how, who wins in the end. But there is a general threshold that has been crossed in terms of tolerance for high drug pricing, in my opinion. And then the other thing, we tend to blame the pharmaceutical manufacturers only. And I think there is equal blame to go around. There's also the PBMs, as you're aware of. They are being scrutinized right now. Well,
I think there's just one word for it, and I know I'm going to stand on a ledge on this one again. It's greed. It's greed across the board. Right? It's greed on the pharmas. Okay, great. Like, for example, take insulin. Why do they keep... Well, they say, we'll make incremental changes to keep their 90-year patent extension. Right? And there's only 4 companies that are authorized under these patents to make, insulin, for example, right? So you have ways to get around the system. It's politics as well, right? Capitol Hill is driving their own, needs. It's the lobbying groups, right, that are sort of being paid to this. So again, it's around greed, right? PBMs, you talked about it. The other thing that we are very different than other countries, and I don't know how this maybe explains it. Most of these other countries that I mentioned, minus sort of maybe India and Mexico and others, where sort of, healthcare is consumed very much on an out-of-pocket basis. But Canada and these other countries, they're a single-payer system. We're not. You're fighting for drug pricing contracts. Right. Yes, you have Medicare, Medicaid. The government is a big payer. Yeah. But then you have all these other health plans. Right. So there's scrutiny there's obviously price controlling happening there. There's politics there. So I think it's the complexity of our health system is actually what's causing our high drug prices, if you really think about it. Right. And then, of course, underneath the layer is politics and greed, sort of at the foundation. So, I mean, maybe we boiled it down, but yeah, we're going to be forced to have change. But, what causes a revolution? It's people. Right. Right. So at some point, we have to sort of try to band together and scream from the top of our lungs that we're not going to take it anymore. So, And I think it's starting to happen maybe a little bit.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I agree. So we're calling debunked on the fact that U.S. taxpayers need to pay higher prices for drug pricing.
Sure.
Okay, on to the next bit that we have to talk about, given that we are, recording this early on in the year. You and I both went to J.P. Morgan. Now, I'm the traditional J.P. Morgan attendee in the sense that I've been going for like 12 years, and I actually step inside the Westin. So I wanted to actually thank the organizers for sticking to the format that they actually began last year. Back in the day, it used to be, first of all, you're surrounded by a sea of suits, and most people are taller than my 5'1" frame. So I would have to jostle my way into lifts, into elevators, as they call them in the U.S. When CEOs would hold their presentations, they would do it in one room, and then everyone would huddle, shuffle, and move to a much smaller room where the same CEO and his management team would answer questions from JP Morgan analysts. And it was a nightmare. You'd have to position yourself towards the back of the room so you could make a quick exit to the other room and actually hope to sit down in that smaller room. Some bright soul in JP Morgan, and thank you so much, decided that, you know what, we're not going to make people do this. So they're going to do everything in the same room. It was so much easier last year. This year I did something even better. I wasn't even in the room. I was in my hotel room.
Nice.
And heard the audio webcast streamed live. So whoever made that change, a big thank you to you. I think it made for a much nicer conference attendee experience.
Seems pretty obvious.
It does, but sometimes the pandemic created a pause, so I think people started rethinking, and so I give kudos to the folks. But you have a different experience. You don't go into the Westin, right? So
I'm not invited, right? So a lot of us are not, right? So, and I think it's so the JPM week has really sprung all these offshoots.
Sure,
right?
sure.
I mean, I think last time I checked, when I was on some Google sheet, showed 35, 40 events happening, right? A lot of social events. And so, and traditionally too, JPM has been very sort of, gravitating towards more pharma and big healthcare and all that sort of stuff. So, us folks, at the early stage, the risk takers, we don't typically, fit into that crowd. We don't wear suits, for example, right? This is overdressed, right? So, so I went to some offshoots. I went to a lot of events, and then I did go to a sort of a traditional early stage pitch conference where I was, judging a couple of panels on digital health and med device. But yeah, the pulse and the feel, right? That's what we wanted to sort of talk about. It's definitely feels less. There's sort of optimism for 2024, but the last 2 years have been, fairly difficult, right? I mean, if you look at sort of, deal announcements, even it's way down, from years over years, and then typically also, deal announcements are traditionally always dominated by pharma and big healthcare or big tech. So, for example, in 2021, I think there were 16 major pharma, announcements, and then on top of that, there was of course all these, digital health or health IT companies or health tech companies getting, raises in their announcements. I don't think I heard 10 the entire week, right? And I think most of it was probably dominated by pharma anyways.
Right.
But it makes sense, right? So 2022, was slowing down. 2023 was a drastic slowdown. And so, JPM week is sort of like that first week. It's almost like the private health tech community announcement week, right? You know how you have public companies have their quarterly earnings.
Right.
So it was natural. If you had a down year in 2023, naturally at JPM you're going to hear less news.
Right.
Because it's sort of the culmination. I'm going to sort of go ahead and now announce these deals. So you sort of had that feel, right? And it's a lot of the things, the sort of the trends or the talk track on what's going to happen this year or what's happening. It's really just what's been happening in 2023. I mean, look, raises are taking longer. Companies are not doing priced rounds, right? They're doing insider rounds, or they're just doing, bridges and extensions. They're doing a lot of debt and things like that. And so it sucks because good companies, you don't want to get priced down, right? And then, so you want to sort of stabilize, and the thought process for us as investors has been, even from the beginning of 2023, we've been saying is just shore up a runway for 2 years, right? And so, look, the Fed meeting notes from the end of the year were positive, right? And then I think the beginning of this year, it was sort of like no news is good news.
Right.
So it's kind of like, well, jury's still out.
Yeah.
Is the Fed going to make 2 interest, cuts this year? I don't think so. I think it's going to be 1.
Okay.
And so
here's a prediction, folks.
Well, I'm just being honest. I just think that we still haven't seen the additional news that come out. Now, by the time we air and put this on, on social, that news may have come out, because I think the next consumer index report is going to come out soon. We're at the end of January right now. So maybe things will look a little bit better. But the other trend that I'll tell you, this is sort of post JPM that's happened, is you've seen, and this is maybe a little bit outside of healthcare, you've continued to see big tech do layoffs.
Right.
So that just happened again. Google announced layoffs. Other companies have announced layoffs. And I think it's pointing to, it's sort of like an addition by subtraction. And let me explain. So when they raised interest rates, they were trying to curb the employment market.
Right.
It wasn't working. It took a little bit of time. There were some layoffs last year. But these layoffs are actually, unfortunately, of course, for the folks getting laid off, it's not good. But it points to the fact that the decisions that the government's been making in terms of cuts, they're actually working, right? So we needed to contract because of these high interest rates. So I think hopefully we're going to see the positive of that, right? And we're starting to enter into earnings season right now.
Right.
So a lot of companies are doing earnings reports in the next couple of weeks off of their first month. So and actually of the fourth quarter of last year. So I think the cautiously optimistic is sort of the statement that I'll make. Right? I think there's only going to be 1 cut.
Okay.
Don't worry. Don't get me wrong. I'll be happy if there's 2 cuts. But I'm just saying. I think there's going to be 1 cut. I think raises for early stage companies is still going to take time.
Right.
Valuations are down. I think there's some companies out there that wish that they had gone public or sold during the heyday of COVID, and now they're sitting there they're overvalued.
Right.
Who's going to buy them?
Right.
And I'm not going to name names who they are, but they're out there. We all know them. They're big names. But so I think that's sort of what's happening. But activity levels seem to be picking up at JPM.
Yeah.
I think a lot of investors who are on the sidelines are going to start coming out and start investing. Us personally, we invested in the beginning of last year. We did not invest past May. So we haven't invested as a venture firm in over 6, 7, 8 months now.
Wow.
But we are actually probably going to be investing this quarter. So I think things will start turning, and I think the back end of the year will probably be better. And so I think JPM, it was just sort of a reflection on what 2023 happened. The real sort of evaluation is going to be 2025 JPM. It'll really be based on, well, did 2024 pan out the way we thought?
Well, even though there wasn't that much news that affected maybe your world, the week of JPM, the week after JPM, there was actually interesting news, right? The news that came out of General Catalyst that they're buying this nonprofit health system out of Ohio called Summa Healthcare, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
What did you think of that?
Wow. Not shocking that General Catalyst is making some news. Well, I think, first of all, look, there's 2 sides to every coin, right? But even if you sort of put that aside, it's big splashy news because General Catalyst has been so active in healthcare and all those sorts of things. PE has been buying hospitals and clinics for a long time. The other thing I'll say is, they don't necessarily have a really good track record.
You mean they as in General Catalyst or they as in PE?
No, I'm talking about PE or private capital buying healthcare providers. The track record is pitiful. It's terrible. Right? So in that sense, you're like, oh, wow, General Catalyst buying it. Now, you're $25 billion under management. You look under your cushion in your couch. Oh, here's a couple billion, right? Oh, let's go buy a health system. So the 2 sides of the coin, right? We talked about. Number 1 is, look, from their perspective, if you're an LP, if you're a General Catalyst investor, hey, this is awesome. Because now suddenly companies or deals that you're going to invest in, your portcos, you get a live existing playground to go and deploy them.
Okay.
But even outside of that, they've got tens of relationships with providers already. So you scratch your head and go, well, you already have these relationships with these health systems. Why did you actually need to go buy one yourself, right?
Okay.
So, okay, fine, you bought one. But I think it just adds to that whole philosophy, right? Oh, we can now bring our own products into our own health system. It's like this is really bad. It's like a drug lord controlling the demand and the supply. Right?
I'm sure Hemant Taneja will appreciate that analogy.
I mean, I'm just saying, it's like, you're controlling the creation and the supply. You're controlling the demand and the supply. So you're investing in in a company, and then they need to go generate revenue. Well, let me go give you the revenue too, right? So, but the real good part about it is, it's a live existing playground to really figure out workflow, really figure out the different elements of making a product actually come to life and hopefully have important quality and outcomes, right? So that's really good. The flip side of it is, okay, so you bought this thing. What happens to that community? What happens to those clinicians? What happens to those employees? You're a for-profit buying a non-profit.
Right.
I don't even want to figure out like how that's going to entail, right? And how are you going to preserve health equity, access, clinical throughput, and all these things while having your own agenda? And then the other thing is, who are you going to get to run this thing? And people are like, well, they need to go hire like really smart healthcare people.
And they have. So it's being run by the former CEO of Intermountain Health, Mark Harrison.
who was brought over even before. Like this was gonna happen. You can kind of see the tea leaves.
Okay.
Right? This was gonna sort of come across. That's great.
Yeah.
Really smart guy. Awesome guy. I really like Intermountain. Intermountain, innovative, big health system, almost a provider, right? Payvider. Right?
Payvider, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Summa Health.
Yeah.
Small,
Yeah.
tiny, regional, community health system. I don't know.
But you know what? Okay, so
I don't know.
I'm going to push back just slightly on this
do.
one. General Catalyst is very well respected. You and I both know that. I think the general criticism of VCs by at least founders that I know of is that these guys are not operators. So here is a company, a VC firm that is actually taking the steps to become an operator.
Yeah.
Now, small firm, small hospital system, I understand that.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's best to start small, because look what happened with Amazon and JP Morgan Berkshire. Big splashy news.
Don't disagree. Yeah.
And total faceplant, right? So I actually think it's not a bad idea to go small. What I am concerned about is, and maybe this is why Intermountain is leading this, is the difference in culture. The difference in culture between Silicon Valley and Ohio is not to be underestimated. I can't pronounce today. Underestimated.
Yeah.
So
Drastic difference.
It's a drastic difference. So this is TBD on this. I would like to see how this develops. But I'm more interested in, are we going to see any copycats, you think?
Well, yeah, and let me just finish the point that you made. So I think, look, Mark and Intermountain, like that from a vision and strategic perspective, great. My sort of 2 cents on this is, but your actual management of this organization, I hope, and maybe this is the softer side of me and the non-VC side of me coming out, hire local, right? Like you have an opportunity to really bump up these amazing administrators and clinicians. Like these people do God's work, right? They live in their communities and they work, and they're not doing it for their paycheck. They're doing it because this is the right thing to do. So I would hate to have, big, West Coast Silicon Valley firm come in and then just wipe out all of management and senior leadership and say, we're going to put our people in who know hospital operations and stuff. That's great. But here's an opportunity to elevate the community, elevate these people, give them the exposure, give them sort of means to do these things that they've wanted to do. Everybody wants to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You don't think everybody wants to put digital technology into their organizations? Of course they do. But then they have other things to deal with, like safety and pricing and and negotiations and all these sorts of things. So I think this is a great thing that everybody will be watching, especially because the track record of private capital buying and functioning healthcare facilities is so bad. So I think it's great. I mean, kudos to Hemant for taking this position. Kudos for them to make this move. Yeah, you're going to have people, questioning both sides of it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there's your own agenda, but I think don't forget the other agenda, because the ideal thing that could happen from here is that you could create the ideal version of what a health system should look like, operate, right, with good outcomes, control cost, efficiency, and everything. So that is the vision, and I hope that vision comes true. And yes, I think you'll have copycats. And I think the copycats, just like usual, are not going to wait around for the thing to play out. Because, if they think that it's going to take 2 to 3 years to play out, I think it's going to take 3 to 5 years to play out, right?
Okay.
And so, but you're going to have copycats who are going to probably make this move in the next year or two. Right?
Interesting.
I think you're going to see
copycats as in copycat VC firms, right?
Yeah, someone else in this sort of arena, like it's either a VC or somebody is going to go buy what I call the supply side, right?
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
They're going to go buy the supply side. I think it's going to happen. So, I mean, look, we already are living in a world where Aetna and CVS got together.
Right.
Who would have thought that a retail stores or a retail pharmacy would get paired up with a payer?
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. So if you look at healthcare in terms of facility delivery, you have payer, you have provider, and you have pharmacy. You've already got you've already got pharma and payer in bed. Who's going to be doing the trifecta? Are we going to have a payer, provider, pharma in bed? Maybe.
You heard it here first.
Maybe, right? Or maybe some combination of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because, and then of course, now that venture capital or, traditional VC has sort of, torn the covers off and said, oh, we're going to go buy a health system, maybe that will happen again.
Yeah.
So but I think the trick is going to be is that we're not going to, unfortunately, get to wait to see it all unfold. The copycats will show up before. Because, you know what? It's always like, well, he's got that toy, I want a toy too.
It's the fear of missing out. So
Yeah.
I hear you
FOMO,
completely.
total FOMO. So,
Well, I invite either Hemant or Mark Harrison to come on our show and chat with us on their vision. We've enjoyed recording this today, and hopefully you enjoy listening to us. We're going to do this monthly. Please write to us at debunked@medcitynews.com. If you have news of deals, if you have news of bad practices that you want to call out, please reach out to us. Once again, this is Arundhati Parmar and
Samir Batra. And please correct us if we're wrong and share your opinions.
absolutely, we love opinions.